Wow, what a treat to be with you all. Thank you for coming. I want to thank Matt and Matt Stevens and Bill and Dave Mims and all the leadership of this organization. It's absolutely amazing and humbling and encouraging to be able to be prayed for such a long time, because they started praying for me before I committed last year, and then I couldn't come. And I'll tell you a little bit about that story. And just an amazing group of people. I'm honored to be here. So I want to start off and tell you a little bit about my background and how I came here. And my hope is that today that God will speak through me in my story, in my imperfect story. And you'll resonate with some aspect of it, and that you'll come away from this with something that inspires you, hopefully, and encourages you. So, okay, my story. So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. Anybody from Baltimore? Yeah, all right, Frankie Kelly in the front. That's awesome. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. And much of my talk that I'm going to share with you this morning is within this context of a search for happiness. And when I grew up in Baltimore, lacrosse is a really big sport. And the first thing I did as a kid was to try to find my happiness in athletic performance. I don't know if any of you can identify with that. My parents, my father rather, and my grandfather are both in the Lacrosse Hall of Fame. And I wanted to be a lacrosse player. And on a good day, I was an average lacrosse player. And so my success and my happiness wasn't going to come in lacrosse. I then went to school at the University of Delaware. Oh my goodness, no way. That's incredible. So as that gentleman in the back will tell you, it's the Fighting Blue Hens, if you're wondering, Fighting Blue Hens. Most of us are in South Jersey, but it's really neat that they let a couple of us out from time to time. And at the University of Delaware, I found my first love. And for me, my first love was understanding that you can make a t-shirt for $5 and sell it for 10. And even I could do that math, and had a lot of fun selling door-to-door on college campuses, and figured out that if I could sell it at Delaware door-to-door, maybe we could sell it at other schools too. And by the time I got out of school, we had sales teams of one form or fashion at 50 different schools around the country, and making them for 5 and selling them for 10. It was an awesome thing. The challenge I had was that I wasn't always buttoned up on the copyright side of things. And I had some problems. And as my dad said, look, pal, when you're 20, you can plead naivete. When you're 21, you have to find a real job. And so I did as so many of us will do. I took my counseling career from movies. I had seen the movie Wall Street. How many of you remember the original Wall Street with Gordon Gekko and Bud Fox? Great movie. And it led me to New York City. And it's so sad, of course, I wanted to be Bud Fox. I wanted to be the guy with the apartment with the exposed brick wall. I wanted Daryl Hannah as my girlfriend. And, you're in big trouble when your role model is Charlie Sheen. So, started this process, and where it is my second chapter of A Search for Happiness. I was looking for happiness and financial success. And I went out, and through the grace of God early, and ended up having some success, and worked at a number of different firms. I spent most of my time at Wall Street, in Wall Street at Merrill Lynch, and did a lot of work in international equities. And I found that it was exhilarating. I loved competing and winning. I loved the scoreboard. I really felt fulfilled. And yet there's still something missing. I still knew that I wasn't completely fulfilled. And I discovered girls. And I went looking for my Daryl Hannah. And really, in my case, it was Daryl Hannah's. And again, just trying to find happiness and meaning and fulfillment. And there are moments of exhilaration, moments in which I said, wow, this is incredible. My life is so awesome. And remember feeling some of the highs. And yet, very quickly, there's some incredibly profound lows. And the biggest one in my life came from when I actually found this amazing girl who blew Daryl Hannah away. And I fell in love with her. But I had this awful conflict in my mind, and this anxiety, and this new dedicated, committed relationship with this woman that I came to love was incompatible with this kind of crazy lifestyle I'd been living. And it really messed with my dope, so to speak. And so I ended up going through very serious anxiety that lasted for about 2.5 years. It's almost debilitating. I once had to take 2 weeks off my job as I tried to reconcile all the things that I thought were going to deliver happiness and this new committed relationship. It was very, very, very difficult, very challenging for me. Kimberly and I ended up deciding to move to North Carolina. I had a couple of friends of mine were going to start up a business in the international institutional derivatives business. It's a mouthful. And we moved to North Carolina. And as a great sign of God's love for me, I was going to do it with these two guys. They backed out. I needed to move to North Carolina where I could hire more people. And they unfortunately passed away in the 9/11 tragedy. And God spared me from that. And it was in North Carolina I came down and started a company called Chapel Hill Brokers. And then the biggest thing in my life happened. It was 1998. Kimberly and I had grown up in a kind of Christian home. Like Blake had said, we'd go to church, we went to Sunday school, but I most assuredly didn't think of faith as a big part or an integral part of my life at all. If you stopped me on the street and said, do you believe that God exists? I definitely would have said yes, but it didn't mean anything at all in my life. But Kimberly and I were going to get married, we're going to have kids, and we said, we should probably join a church. It's what moral, social people do. And so we went out and we were recommended into a Presbyterian church. And I'd grown up in a very liberal Presbyterian type of upbringing. It made me feel comfortable. We're going to go into this church. We ended up showing up, and we showed up about 5-10 minutes late. And when we got there, we looked at each other and said, oh my goodness, this is one of those born-again places. And that really threw me off. At that point in time in my life, that was a bad thing. I didn't think that born-again churches really had any type of intellectual vitality to them. And so we got through the sermon, and it was really strange because there's this guy named David Bowen. David Bowen was at the podium, and he was talking about Jesus as if he believed he was true, and talking about the Bible as if he believed that was true. And that threw me for a loop. I didn't have any place in my mind about where you could go ahead and have somebody who was confident, articulate, and intelligent who actually believed that the Bible and its stories in it were true. It was very, very strange. Well, we would have left if we hadn't come in late. And so you know that you can't come in late and then leave early, and so we stuck through it. And it sent me on this process. I said, I can't make sense of this guy. And I thought, oh my goodness, here's how it might go down. I might be at heaven, and St. Peter is there for the entrance interview. And he says, all right, Kaestner, while you're on earth, you're at like 1,000 books, but you never cracked the cover of the best-selling book of all time. And I thought to myself, can't go down like that. I can't not get into heaven because I never opened the Bible. So I said, okay, I'm going to read it. And we're at a prayer breakfast, so you probably all know how many pages are in the Bible. And so I open up the Bible, I'm like, I can't do this. It's way too many pages. But I looked in the back, and there's this New Testament part. And I knew enough about Christianity to know that that was the Christian part, and it looked a lot like the Cliff Notes. So I got through prep school by reading the Cliff Notes of all the great classics. And so I said, I can do this. So I started reading the New Testament, and actually it took me further away from faith. So I was reading things in the Bible like, before Abraham was born, I am. And when I was in heaven, I saw Satan fall down to earth like lightning. And I'm thinking, this is really, really strange stuff. And I thought, I can't really identify with this faith. I can't identify with this Jesus guy. He's got a God complex. As it turns out, for very good reason, he is God. And as I started to process this, and some of the stories in the Bible about the first witnesses to the resurrection of Christ were women, which at that time was not thought of as having any type of real veracity to it, I thought, oh my goodness, I think this is true. This story that I've been reading is true, and if it's true, it changes everything. And so for me, it did. It did change everything. And it started this incredible journey that I'm still on, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. One of the biggest things that had an impact on me was that I started this company called Bandwidth. I sold the company that we had before to what became something called ICAP, and we started a company called Bandwidth with my best friend and business partner, David Morken. And we got together and we said, look, we know that corporate culture is really important. We want our corporate culture to mirror who we want to be as individuals. And so for us, it's faith first now. I'm a new believer at the time. He was a lifelong Christian. Faith first, then family, and then work, and then fitness. So I'm going to unpack those just a very little bit in reverse order. So on the fitness side, David is a world-class endurance athlete. I am a neighborhood class endurance athlete. And I live in a very, very small neighborhood. But I also like to work out. So today we've got, between the two companies, Bandwidth and Republic Wireless, we've got about 600 employees. About 450 of them work out every day for an hour and a half. Citywide champion ice hockey. Citywide champion ice hockey team. We've got a really competitive basketball team. We entered a team into the endurance race, cycling race called the Race Across America, and won it. We were second in the Trans-Rockies race. It's a big part of who we are. It's a big part of our culture. It is not as important as work. Sometimes we have to remind people that. Work is our third thing, and work for us is when we work to take a, we're going to be on the 80s movie kick this morning, from Chariots of Fire. When we work, we feel God's pleasure. That's what we're designed to do. We love competing and winning. Big part of who we are. The second thing for us is family. Family is more important than work for us. We have a lot of young employees that have young families. And David and I believe that you've got an incredible opportunity to be a mom or a dad coming home from work and being there for bedtime, bath time, dinner time, story time, all of that. So we kick our employees out at 6 o'clock so they can go home, dial into their families, be there, be present. But because we're in the telecom industry, which is very, very competitive, you can't get by, because if you're doing the math now, you're like, wait, you get an hour and a half to work out, and you're out at 6 o'clock. So you dial back in at 8:30, and you work till the work gets done. But one night that you don't do that is Wednesday night. Wednesday night for us is date night. It's a time for me to get out and to tell my bride that she is indeed more important to me than my work. And number one, of course, is faith. And at Bandwidth, we don't have fish on our business cards, and we don't do healing ceremonies on Tuesdays. We have them on Wednesdays. We don't do healing ceremonies. But for us, it's really important that David and I get a chance to share why we do what we do. And for us, we work for the glory of God. It's really important. It's what drives us. It's the most important thing about what we do. We hire people from all sorts of different faiths and all sorts of different social persuasions, and the whole mix. We want to hire the best person for the job, and yet everybody understands why we do what we do. And I think that there's a lot of great secular research on how important that is. Simon Sinek talks about it. Clayton Christensen talks about it. These are folks that really understand and unpack how important it is to unpack the why of leadership. So that's what we do. So I wanted to share with you a little bit more about some of the journey that I've been on since being a believer. One thing I do want to, before I move off of Bandwidth, I want to share one story that's an encouragement, I hope. And to be clear, there are lots of things we've done wrong at Bandwidth early on when we try to integrate our faith in the workplace. I'll give you an example. A mistake for us was early on we had Bible study at our work, and that was an awful idea. It created an us versus them type of culture, and that was not a good thing. But the other thing that was a mistake for us is it took me 8 or 9 years to get comfortable in praying with an employee that I knew was going through crisis. I didn't want to be too over the top. Oh my goodness, the opportunities I've missed to love on people over the years. So about 9 years into it, a guy named James Roberts walked in my office and said, listen, I'm going to be late for work. Dad's got chemo. And I just said, James, do you mind if I pray for you? And he took it for what absolutely I intended to be, is me loving on in the best way I can. And so that was something that was great. I wish I had done that earlier on. One thing that did work out well is that early on at Bandwidth, we had a policy that we would not do any business with spammers and with the adult entertainment business. If you have a business that's founded on the culture of faith first, family, work, fitness, you can't possibly deal with the adult entertainment industry. And at the time, they were the largest consumers of internet access, which in our early days, we were very focused on. So everybody in the company knew that you couldn't sell to those types of people. And a big deal came in. At the time, it was an OC3. This back in 2002. Very big circuit. There's a point in time in which we had spent through all the money we had, the lowest cash balance that we had in the company. And this deal came in the name of a holding company. And we ended up selling it. And I remember closing that deal because I remember how hard David high-fived me and how bad my hand hurt. He's a former Marine. We were so fired up, we had this big circuit that came in. And then as you might imagine, during the provisioning process, we found out it was for the bad guys. So we had an ethical problem. The ethical problem for us was not, do you continue to install it? We knew we couldn't do that. Our culture was based faith first and family. You couldn't possibly do that. Our ethical challenge was, do we compensate the sales rep? And we went back through and saw all the different things that the sales rep had done. He had done everything we had asked him to do. He'd worked on this deal for months. His family knew about this deal. He'd expected this deal. We knew his personal circumstance. We knew that he needed the money. And so at the point in time in which we had the lowest cash balance, we paid out the biggest commission check to a circuit that we never installed. And I think that God used that. And so from that point on, for the next 5 years, as you heard from Matt, we were the 4th fastest growing privately held company in the country without venture financing. And so I really think that God rewarded that one time. Now, there have been many times in which we've made mistakes, and I don't want to let you to think that we've always nailed it. Lots of times our motives have been impure, lots of mistakes that we've made, but that was one that I want to offer up as an encouragement that really did work out well. Okay, so some other things that have been going on in my life since becoming a believer, because it hasn't always been completely smooth. So my life is now completely reoriented towards this God who loves me, who sent the Son for me, and Kimberly and I are starting to make more and more money, and I came across this guy who is still today one of my very best friends in the world. And he came to understand that we're starting to invest and start different ministries in Durham and in different places. And he said, okay, Henry, after having met with me, I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to help people and understand where they might give in Durham and other places and how they might give in a way that really moves the needle in the community. He says, that sounds great, but I just want to know from you, why do you give? And I thought about it for a second, and it occurred to me that I had been giving my money. We'd probably, at the point in time, Kimberly and I were probably giving 20%. So that's a double tithe. I thought maybe in heaven there's a special place for the double tither. Maybe, you get seats in the luxury box of Angels games or something like that. And I mumbled something to him about probably something like pay it forward or something awful like that. And something very theologically, maybe C-. Now, he didn't grade it at the time. And then going back in and spending time in the Bible, it seemed like every passage was about money and where my heart was. And things like, it's more blessed to give than receive. And Christ, who is rich, became poor, so I, who am poor, might become rich. And I started thinking about these things and changed everything. The biblical message of generosity as shared by this guy, Daryl Heald, for me was my born again moment. And that was a big deal for me. Now, it didn't completely cure me. So some of the things that also I was wrestling with was this continued search for happiness. And even after I came to faith. And so Kimberly and I felt a little unsettled. I thought, the thing we really need, the American dream, is to buy a house. And when we have a house, we'll feel really, really comfortable and we'll feel really happy. And so we bought a house. It was great. We had a vegetable garden. And for about 6 months, I was really happy. And then I thought, you know what? We really like the beach. The beach is awesome. When I go down there, I feel relaxed. I'm away from work. And we went down and we bought a beach house. And when I bought the beach house, we were happy for about 9 days. I was happy for about 9 days. And I realized that this search for happiness, for me, was a challenge when I still had my mind focused on money and the things that money might be able to buy. So I want to share some things that came to me from an author called C.S. Lewis that really made an impact in my life. And C.S. Lewis, as told by a great pastor named Tim Keller, talks about the fact that when we are hungry, it's not proof that there is food, but it's not proof that we're going to get food, but it's proof that there is food. And I found that in my life, even after I had committed my life to God, that I still had this emptiness, this hunger. And as I come to understand it, it's not necessarily proof that I will find God if I'm not looking, but it's proof that there is God. And that just simple thought has really oriented my life over the course of the last 20 years as I've tried to understand who He is. And that experience has really extended itself to what I do now as a job. So I am now a venture capitalist. I actually gave up the chairmanship role in December of last year. I'm focused exclusively on coming alongside faith-driven entrepreneurs to help encourage them in the workplace as they too try to understand how God would use their businesses. And one of the things that I've come to find as I've worked with them is that they all have, like me, an identity challenge. Their identity is oftentimes as this guy or this gal that's running a business that's growing at 20% month over month, or just closed Google as an account. And as I work with them, and we work with companies that would otherwise be funded by other secular venture capitalists, find out that they have very, very high levels of stress and anxiety in their life. And so as I was working through them with this, and as we'd have these annual conferences and we'd have people like Keller and others talk into their lives, came to find out that not only was that a real challenge for them, But ultimately, it was a challenge for me, and here's how that unpacked itself. Last year, I was supposed to be with you all. I was very generously invited to share my story about how God's worked in my life with you, and I was really excited about coming and sharing it. And my oldest son had a really bad mental health crisis. And for 3 months, we were just trying to keep him alive. It was a very, very difficult time. And I came to understand through that period in which Benjamin would be at school, and I couldn't be anywhere outside of a 10-minute radius because I'd get called up to school because bad things were going on. For 3 months, I couldn't even go to Palo Alto, which is about a half hour away from my house. I had to be at a Starbucks right near campus so I could be there with him. And for 3 months, we were just trying to keep him alive, but I couldn't make any meetings. I couldn't do any trips. We have an office in Southeast Asia. I couldn't go there. Many of my conference calls were interrupted because of something that was going on that I needed to attend to. And I found at the beginning part of that I was completely lost. I was this venture capitalist that apparently had it all put together. I'd had a successful entrepreneurship career. We're now starting to really hit some great hits with our venture capital fund. And I came to find out that my identity was really wrapped up in that. And that without entrepreneurial success and without venture capital success, I felt really hollow. And God worked through that in my life to help me to come to understand what I had talked about being true with our different portfolio companies, that their identity shouldn't just be as this CEO of this fast-growing company, but ultimately, they couldn't earn their salvation. They were beloved children of God, and I had been preaching that and sharing that with them, but I hadn't internalized it. So I had gone through this depression as my son went through this awful, awful time. And God used that to help me to understand that indeed, he doesn't need bandwidth.com to survive or prosper. Doesn't need Sovereign's Capital to do it either. He took this widow in the Bible and her 2 mites and made it the greatest gift and the greatest example of generosity of all time. So he doesn't need my money. He doesn't need my success. He just wants me. And I'd been a believer for 20 years, and I'd been somebody who had talked about faith in the workplace, and I still didn't get it. But during this experience that you were all kind of party to last year, I got it. For 2 months, I couldn't do any work at all. I spent a lot of time in Scripture, a lot of time in prayer. And I came to understand that my identity is as a child of God. And it changed everything for me. One of the passages was really helpful for me during that time is something that you probably all know very, very well. It's Psalm 1. It's this great book in the Bible, a great chapter in the Bible. And the way that it impacted me in my story is that it talks about this tree being planted by streams of water that bears its fruit in season, which on the flip side of that means sometimes it doesn't bear its fruit. And last fall, when I was supposed to be with you, it wasn't bearing any fruit. But then it goes on to say, but its leaf doesn't wither. And all it does is prosper. And that was really impactful for me. There's a time that we'll all have in the future as we come to know God and try to enjoy him forever. There's a time in the future, and it's talked about in Revelation, when we'll be in heaven and the tree will bear its fruit every single month. Until then, we have this opportunity, if we plant our tree by streams of water, and all too often times, even as somebody who's driven by their faith, I wasn't doing that. I was jetting around the world, or I was doing all sorts of different things that would distract me from him. I wasn't planting my stream by water. And for me, that water is God's word. If I'm not in God's word every day, I'm completely lost. So my hope this morning, as you try to figure out all these different things about how God is working in your life, whether he's true or not, and maybe you go back to the Bible too, like I did, and try to figure out whether this thing that everybody seems to think is true, if it's really true or not. My hope is that you do try to understand the magnificent beauty of this book. Without it, I'm lost. And I got to tell you that it's just an incredible honor and privilege, and special for me to be here this year beyond this personal tragedy that we had. And the postscript to that is that while my son tried to take his life many times, he got through it. And he was miraculously healed in December. And we've had an incredibly awesome 2017. As you might hear from people who survived cancer, who say, it was an amazing experience, I never want to do it again, and it's the same for me. It completely changed our lives. My relationship with my son is infinitely better than it ever was. But more important than that, God used that time to bring me closer to him so I could really understand who my true identity was and endeavor to understand if he was really, really real and if he was really, really there. And he really, really is. So thank you for allowing me to share my story this morning.